Alright guys, so we're here, we're going to try and pump out the gas tank. I got the new tank and new pumps. So unfortunately when this happened I have a full tank of gas, so I got to try and get it all out. So what I went ahead and did is took my old wall barrel from the 240 and then connected two leads from the pump. I put an inline fuse and then we'll hook it up to the battery. This is a little dangerous. I don't really recommend this, but I don't feel like trying to siphon it out any other way right now. And it's like 17 gallons, 18 gallons of gas. So let's see what happens. Alright, so now we are underneath the car. I'm at the rear tank. And I'm going to, I sprayed some WD-40 penetrant on these, on the bolts. So now we're going to try and we're going to back them off. Not take them all the way off yet because I don't have the tank supported. But I want to get the bolts backed off. And then I have to disconnect all the fuel lines and the electrical connection to the pump. So for this, I'm using a 1/2-inch wrench on the top. There we go. And then the nut itself is a 15 millimeter. All right. So that's good. Good enough. Now on to the second one. Oh, these things are super rusted. Alright, so I got the bolts backed off to where I want them. Now to disconnect this electrical connection for the fuel pump. On the female side, there's two tabs, one on either side, that you have to pull out of the way in order to get the plug off. Focus here. Alright, you can see the two tabs. Alright, you got to make sure you get both of those off or you're going to end up breaking it. And you're not going to have the proper connection when you go put it back together. Next, what I'm going to have to do is remove maybe the back two nuts and bolts, just to get the tank lowered enough to where I can get in there to get the fuel lines off the top of the tank. There's just a little bit of slack here, and I really don't want to take the lines off all the way back here. So that's what I'm going to attempt to do now, is get these nuts and bolts off in the back here and lower the tank down. Alright, so I got the 2 bolts out. I got that electrical connection disconnected. Alright, now I'm going to move on to taking these 3 screws out here for the filler neck. Alright, after about an hour of fighting with this thing, I finally got the tank out. As you can see, it's in very rough shape. This is the top of it. Now these 2 fuel lines that are connected to it, you're going to need these fuel line fittings. There's a 3/8 and a 1/2 inch line. And then with these, what you have to do is slide it over, and then you have to force these in. And then what it does is releases these springs on the other end of this, the female end. It's spring steel, so when you push it over this, it'll lock in, and then the pressure will keep it from coming off with the spring. So what you want to do is slide these in, and then you can wiggle off the female end of that. So these fuel line fittings depress those springs. They act like teeth almost, and hang on to these. And then there's also these safety clips here, which go on. This one goes on this side like this. It sits on this fuel end, and then the female end goes in here and gets clipped on. So those have to come off first, and then you can use the fuel line fittings to take these off. So now I have the fun task of trying to break this lock ring, get this lock ring off, so I can take this fuel pump out, because I need the top of the fuel pump to go on the old one. And then I also have to pop out this vent, because I'm going to reuse that. This is the filler neck, which is in extremely rough shape. So I'm going to try and get this hose off and see how bad this actually is. As you can see, it's rusted through. This is just, the outer part's just for the vent. As you can see, the holes on the inside. So it doesn't actually carry fuel. That's this tube here, the inner tube. As long as it vents, we shouldn't have a problem. I'm going to attempt to salvage this. Hopefully it'll work. But in the meantime, I got to try and break this lock ring free. Alright, so I had to hammer out the lock ring because it was completely rusted. As you can see, this is all that's left to it, are these little fragments. So I had to go through and break out every little piece to get this out. Gotta be careful. Right, so we got the pump out. So I'm gonna have to transfer this over and transfer the top, and then we'll have to cut these wires and slice them into the new pump. Now I'm hoping the float still works. Hoping, but this is the inside of the tank. Oh yeah, that was gnarly. Still had fuel in the pump too, which is pretty crazy. Now what I'm going to do is take this assembly off, I'm going to go grab the new pump I got, make sure it's the same, and put it in the tank, and then start getting the new tank installed. Alright, so we got the old fuel pump laid out. Like I said, I'm going to go ahead now, remove the float, and then we're going to disconnect these wires, and then we've got to splice them into the new fuel pump. So this is the float, like I've mentioned. Really hope it's still good. I mean, it doesn't look like it's in that bad a shape. You just got to be careful, especially with something that's this old. And when you take this connector off from underneath, that you don't rip it off. I mean, it's not that it's difficult to put a new one in, it's just that's one other thing you got to worry about. So next, we have to pry the top of this off. With this fuel pump, it comes with this little plastic wedge. Okay, you can use this wedge to pry up against this, and then the top of these lines will come out from the pump. Alright, so now we got that separated. We're going to stretch out these wires a little bit, and then I'm going to snip them a little further down, closer to the pump. This way I'll have enough room to do what I need to do when I put them on the new pump. I'll have more than enough space. So next, I'm going to strip these wires. Now I'm going to take my new pump. These wires they already come pre-stripped, so you just gotta pull the end off. And then also with the kit, they give you two connectors to put the wires together. So first, what I want to do, put the top of the lines back in the pump, fuel lines back in. So next, what I want to do is put the float back on. Now I'm going to put the screws back in. I'm not going to tighten them all the way up just yet. Alright, so I have the screws in temporarily. Floats on. Now what I want to do is route my wires similar to how they were before. I have the route I want for my wires. I'm going to cut a little bit off of these that went to the pump. Very important. Pull on these, make sure they're not going to come out. Alright, so this is the new tank. Now the fuel pump comes with a bunch of gaskets, but the tank also came with its own gasket. So I'm going to use that one to seal it off. This is the new lock ring. It's actually intact, which is nice. So now I'm going to drop this tank in. I'm going to drop the fuel pump in, get it all lined up, make sure everything fits, and then snug up the lock ring. Alright, so we got the fuel pump going in. Something to note, there are 2 tabs on either side, and those fall into those grooves. So you got to make sure those are lined. And then on this tank, the arrow is actually facing what would be the left-hand side as you're looking at it. Alright, so we finally got the valve in on the top. The grommet was kind of a pain getting in. But if you just take your time, work it in little by little, it should go in no problem. So I have the fuel tanks basically in. I got the fuel line reconnected. The fuel pump is reconnected. Yeah, fuel lines are on. Now I gotta try and get the vent hooked back up. This is a very stiff hose, and it's gonna be an absolute nightmare, but once I get this connected, I can put the new straps on and then throw some gas in it and see if it works.